Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take the latest insights, the real-world intelligence, pull out the most important bits of knowledge, and really give you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. Today, we're diving straight into something that, well, it affects every single one of us, often in ways we don't even fully grasp: cybersecurity. It's moved way beyond just being about abstract threats, hasn't it? It's now about the fundamental security of our public services, the stability of businesses, trust in charities, and honestly, just the smooth running of our everyday lives. And these digital threats, they're evolving so fast, it demands constant vigilance, really a fundamental shift in how we approach protection. So our mission today is to cut through all that noise. We'll look at recent findings, real incidents impacting the public sector, businesses, charities. We want to reveal the alarming challenges, but also the clear paths towards resilience. And this isn't just tech talk, is it?
Not at all. It's really about understanding the human element, which is huge, and the practical steps organizations can actually take.
Exactly. And what it all means for you, whether you're leading a team, running a business, or just trying to get by in this digital world, we're here to distill those key takeaways for you. Okay, before we properly dive in, this deep dive is brought to you by Stonefly. They're a true leader in enterprise storage, backup and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions. So if you're looking for secure, ransomware-proof storage, Stonefly sells air-gapped and immutable storage. Now what that means is your critical data is kept completely isolated and unchangeable by unauthorized access. Even if attackers somehow manage to breach your main network, that air-gapped data is safe. To schedule a demo, see how they can protect your digital assets, just contact sales@stonefly.com. They're really focused on making sure your data stays safe, whatever happens. Okay, let's unpack this then. It feels like we're just constantly hearing about cyber attacks, right? Especially hitting public services. It's almost background noise now. But what's the true scale? I mean, how common is it really? And what are the biggest threats we're seeing right now, particularly for those services we all rely on?
It's true. The frequency is.
Yeah.
Well, it's alarming. And it really highlights how pervasive these threats are now. One of the biggest, certainly one of the most disruptive threats we're seeing, particularly in the public sector, is this alarming rise of ransomware. It feels like news of ransomware hitting state and local governments is just constant now. It's moved beyond isolated incidents to, well, a continuous stream. And we've seen some really concrete examples with devastating real-world impacts. Take Jackson County, Missouri, for instance. A ransomware attack there forced a weeks-long closure of county offices. Think about that direct impact on people's lives.
Yeah, what kind of things couldn't people do?
Well, they couldn't make tax payments, couldn't search property records online, couldn't get marriage licenses. Even looking up county inmates wasn't possible. It's just a complete paralysis of essential services. And then you have Tarrant County in Texas. Attackers demanded a staggering $700,000 after taking control of the website and knocking out critical comms lines like email and phone.
Wow, $700,000.
Exactly. Or look at the New Mexico Administrative Office of the District Attorney. They spent days just trying to restore servers because prosecutors were locked out of essential files. These aren't minor glitches, you know. They can literally cripple a city's ability to function.
That level of disruption is just massive, isn't it? Bringing basic services grinding to a halt. And I remember the Atlanta attack back in 2018. That felt like a real wake-up call for many. What did that incident really show us?
Absolutely. That Atlanta attack, it's still considered probably the most significant ransomware breach against a major U.S. city. It affected up to 6 million people, cost the city almost, $17 million? But the real insight from Atlanta wasn't just the dollar figure. It was this chilling realization that cybersecurity isn't just about protecting data or preventing downtime. It's about the fundamental ability of a city to actually operate.
So it elevated it, really.
It absolutely did. It effectively elevated cybersecurity to the level of a public utility, like water or electricity. That shift in perception from just an IT department issue to an existential threat to civic life, that's the real nugget here. It demands attention right at the top, in government, in every organization providing public services, because the impact goes way beyond lost data. It hits public trust, the very fabric of how things work.
And here's where it gets, really interesting, I think, because it's not always these external hackers launching complex ransomware. Sometimes the biggest vulnerabilities are much closer to home, right? What's the story there? How does human error fit in?
That's a crucial point. We talk about insider threats, and these are people who just by being employees or associated with an organization, have privileged access to sensitive systems, sensitive data. Now, they can compromise security in different ways. Sure, you get intentional acts of data theft, sabotage, those happen. But the statistics, they tell a slightly different, perhaps more worrying story. More than half of all organizations experience some kind of insider threat incident within the past year.
More than half.
Yeah. And what's even more striking, over 2/3 of data breach, that's a huge 68%, involve a non-malicious human element. So think user error, someone accidentally clicking a phishing link. It often comes down to negligence, not actual malice.
So it's less about the disgruntled employee deliberately causing chaos and more often just someone making a mistake, an honest mistake.
Precisely. Look at the Verizon breach, September 2023. Around 63,000 Verizon employees had sensitive personal data, including social security numbers, exposed. Why? Because a colleague inadvertently and without authorization had possession of these files. What's really concerning there is that this breach went undiscovered for months.
Months, wow.
Yeah, and it just shows the massive scale of impact that can come from a single, likely unintentional act. It really forces us to ask, how do you actually protect against human error? Because, negligence is much trickier to combat than malice. You can't just install a firewall against human nature, right?
Right.
You have to build the human element into your defense strategy, focus on awareness, processes, building that security culture.
And this isn't just a U.S. problem, is it? Because across the pond, the U.K. seems to be facing an equally tough, maybe even escalating battle with these same threats in its public sector. What are the numbers telling us over there?
Oh, very much so. The UK has seen a really dramatic surge in cyber data breaches within local authorities. Recent research shows these breaches have jumped by, wait for it, 388% in just the last 3 years.
388%?
Yep. And metropolitan councils alone reported over 12,700 data breaches during that time. They also paid out more than £260,000 in compensation for legal claims linked to those breaches. These aren't small figures. They represent real financial and operational hits on local government, impacting local taxes, impacting service delivery.
Are there specific examples that stand out?
Well, Sheffield City Council reported the highest number of security incidents, 1,512 in 3 years. Manchester City Council wasn't far behind, 1,493, and Wakefield Council had 1,268. And again, these aren't just numbers on a page. They represent disruptions to thousands of public services, potentially affecting millions of citizens who rely on their local councils for, well, everything from bin collections to social care.
And wasn't there a very recent incident involving Oxford City Council, something about historical data?
Yes, that's a very recent and quite revealing case. Just this June, Oxford City Council had to apologize for a cybersecurity incident. Criminals accessed, and this is the key bit, some historic data on legacy systems.
Legacy systems, old stuff.
Exactly. Not just current information. It included personal data of poll station workers and ballot counters who'd worked on city council elections between 2001 and 2022.
Wow, it's 21 years of data.
21 years of potentially sensitive data exposed, affecting people who probably thought their information was long gone, Now the council acted quickly. Their automated systems spotted and removed the attacker. They minimized access, brought in external cyber specialists, shut down main systems for checks, the right moves.
Okay.
They've contacted affected individuals, reassured the public about email and other services being secure, but the investigation is ongoing to find out exactly what was accessed, if anything was actually taken. But it really highlights how far back a breach can reach, doesn't it? Underscores the need to secure those old legacy systems, not just the shiny new ones.
Absolutely. How does that fit the broader trend?
Well, if you look at the bigger picture, cyber attacks on UK local authorities jumped by 387% between 2022 and 2024. Compare that to non-cyber data breaches, physical files lost, that sort of thing, which only rose by 25% in the same period.
That's a huge difference.
It is. What's really fascinating, or maybe alarming, is the sheer speed of that cyber-specific rise. It shows a clear, rapid shift in the threat landscape towards digital attacks, far outpacing traditional breach causes. It's a stark reminder, really, that the digital front is where these battles are increasingly being fought.
So, given this whole global picture, this escalating threat level, why are public sector organizations, state governments, local councils, why are they such prime targets? What makes them so attractive to cyber criminals beyond just the data?
Yeah, there are a few key reasons that create this kind of perfect storm for attackers targeting the public sector. Firstly, as you mentioned, the data. They hold and share vast amounts of personal data, everything from addresses, financial info, health records, really sensitive stuff that's incredibly valuable on the dark web for identity theft, other crimes. So they're a treasure trove.
Right. That makes sense.
Secondly, there's this perception, often accurate, that they're more likely to actually pay a ransomware demand. Because the services they provide are so critical, emergency services, public health, infrastructure, any prolonged downtime has immediate, severe, and very public consequences for citizens.
There's huge pressure on them.
Immense pressure makes officials more inclined to pay quickly to restore services, avoid public outcry, maybe even worse in extreme cases. And then, on top of those incentives for attackers, the sector itself faces inherent challenges. Many public sector bodies struggle with lack of budget specifically for cybersecurity. They're often working with tight resources, making it hard to invest in the best defenses or hire enough cyber talent. Staff are often stretched thin, juggling lots of tasks, which can lead to mistakes.
The skills gap, too.
And the digital skills gap? Yes. Often a significant issue in many departments. Not enough trained people to manage, monitor, respond effectively to complex threats. So you put it all together. High-value targets, strong incentives to pay ransoms, and often systemic resource constraints. It just makes them an easier target compared to, say, a big private company with a dedicated security team.
Okay, so that's the worrying picture for the public sector. How does this translate to other organizations, businesses, charities? They often face similar threats, but maybe have even fewer resources, right? What do the numbers tell us about their situation?
Yeah, the latest figures from surveys paint a pretty clear and still concerning picture for businesses and charities, too. Just over 4 in 10 businesses, 43%, and 3 in 10 charities, 30% reported experiencing any kind of cybersecurity breach or attack in the last 12 months.
Any kind at all.
Any kind. And if you scale that up, it means roughly 612,000 UK businesses and 61,000 UK charities were affected. That's a huge number of organizations facing these challenges. It's widespread. Now, looking at trends by size, there was actually a slight decrease in overall prevalence among the micro and small businesses compared to the previous year. But prevalence stayed consistently high for medium businesses, 67%, and large businesses, 74%.
Does that mean smaller businesses are actually safer? Or is it something else?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? It might not mean they're more secure. It could actually suggest that smaller organizations, with fewer IT resources, less sophisticated monitoring, they might just be worse at identifying and reporting breaches.
So they might be getting hit just as often, but they just don't know it.
Exactly, which is a potentially significant blind spot. We also see interesting differences between sectors. Businesses and information and communications, 69%, and professional, scientific, technical sectors, 55%. They're much more likely to identify breaches.
Which kind of makes sense, given their digital nature.
Right. Could be their reliance on data, or maybe they just have better detection systems in place because it's core to their business. On the flip side, sectors like food and hospitality, only 30% identifying breaches, and retail wholesale at 32%, they're less likely. Again, could be a detection gap rather than fewer attacks. So for you, listening, understanding these sector nuances is pretty important for gauging your own risk level.
Okay, so we hear a lot about sophisticated attacks, zero-day exploits, all this advanced stuff. But despite all that, one, let's say, old adversary still seems to dominate the landscape, doesn't it? We keep coming back to it.
You're absolutely right. Despite everything else, phishing attacks remain stubbornly prevalent. In fact, they are the most prevalent type of breach. They affect 85% of businesses and 86% of charities that had any kind of breach. That's huge.
Astonishingly high.
It is. And what's really insightful isn't just that it's common, but why it's still so effective and disruptive. Organizations consistently say phishing is incredibly time-consuming. Just the sheer volume of attempts requires constant investigation, constant staff training. For many, it's not a rare thing. It's a daily occurrence, a constant drain on resources.
And it's getting harder to spot, right?
Yeah.
With AI and things like that.
Exactly. That's the next layer of complexity. There's this growing awareness now that more sophisticated methods, like AI impersonation, are becoming mainstream. AI can make phishing emails, messages far more convincing. It can personalize content, mimic writing styles of people, even generate realistic voice messages, deepfakes. It makes them incredibly hard to detect.
So the old advice, look for typos, isn't enough anymore.
Not really. The real takeaway isn't just train your staff better in the old way. It's about recognizing that kind of training is fast becoming obsolete. The insight now is the urgent need to build a sort of default skepticism in every digital interaction. Trust has to be earned, not assumed, because the fakes are getting that good. Which raises a tough question, doesn't it? How do you empower your team to be healthily skeptical online without grinding productivity to a halt?
That's a tricky balance. Okay, so we talked about overall breaches, phishing dominating. Is there a specific type of cybercrime that's showing a noticeable increase, something hitting the bottom line?
Yes, there is a critical shift worth highlighting, specifically around ransomware crime. While the overall level of cybercrime stayed pretty static for businesses, the percentage experiencing a ransomware crime, and that means a financial ransom, was actually demanded that significantly increased. It went from less than 0.5% in 2024 up to 1% in 2025.
Okay, 1% sounds small, but scaled up.
Scaled up, that translates to an estimated 19,000 businesses affected in just 1 year. And it's important to make the distinction here. Many more organizations are targeted by ransomware, or they detect it early and block it. But this 1% refers specifically to cases where attackers successfully got to the point of demanding money.
Ah, okay.
So while some are blocking attacks, this increase suggests a significant and growing number are facing that direct financial threat. Attackers seem to be getting better at reaching that ransom demand stage.
And when these incidents do hit, what's the real financial fallout? People often think of the ransom payment, maybe, but the reality is usually much more complex, maybe even hidden costs involved, right?
You've hit on an absolutely critical point there, one that many organizations really underestimate. The financial impact goes way beyond just a direct ransom payment or the immediate IT recovery bill. Let's break down some of the costs we're seeing. For any cyber breach or attack, the mean average cost of the single most disruptive one was about £1,600 for businesses and £3,240 for charities. But for those breaches that actually had a clear negative outcome, like losing money or data being stolen, the mean average cost jumps significantly. It goes up to £8,260 for businesses and a massive £21,540 for charities.
Wow, that charity figure is huge.
It is, and it's actually skewed high by one single charity response that cost £350,000, which just underscores the potential for truly catastrophic individual impacts, especially for smaller organizations. But here's something that's often overlooked and maybe a bit misleading. The median cost for most breaches is typically £10.
Zero. How can that be?
Well, it doesn't mean there was no impact. It usually implies that for many organizations, there wasn't identified material outcome, or they didn't feel the need for a costly external response. This zero-cost median could be because they contained it quickly, or maybe they aren't accurately tracking all the costs, or maybe, they're just hesitant to admit the full financial hit.
Right, the hidden costs.
Exactly. Even without direct financial loss, the staff time spent investigating, fixing problems, dealing with the aftermath, that's a significant indirect cost. For medium and large businesses, staff time spent on breaches has a non-zero median cost, which highlights that ongoing internal disruption, even for incidents that don't seem to cost money directly. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How well are organizations truly accounting for those hidden costs, lost productivity, reputational damage, loss of trust?
And what about cyber-facilitated fraud? Is that separate, and how does it stack up?
Yes, cyber-facilitated fraud is distinct but very closely related. It's estimated around 3% of businesses and 1% of charities experience this. That's about 40,000 businesses and 2,000 charities. And what's really insightful here, again, is that a striking 54% of these frauds result directly from phishing attacks.
There it is again. Phishing.
It just reinforces how phishing acts as this critical gateway for other, often more financially damaging, crimes. When you look at the cost, the mean average cost of cyber-facilitated fraud is £5,900 per business. If you exclude the high-end responses, it jumps to £10,000. What really stands out is that these fraud costs can often be significantly higher than other types of cybercrime. So when a breach directly leads to financial fraud, the hit tends to be more severe and immediate.
So a phishing email isn't just an annoyance.
It can be the direct route to substantial financial loss. Absolutely.
Okay, so with these threats so clearly in focus and understanding these alarming costs, what's being done, and maybe more importantly, what should be done to secure our digital lives? It sounds like technology alone isn't the answer. It's got to be more comprehensive.
Absolutely. It's a multifaceted problem, needs multifaceted solutions. We have to move beyond just thinking about tech fixes. When we talk about strengthening defenses, we really have to start with those foundational security measures. Things every organization, no matter the size, should ideally have in place. This includes critical stuff like off-site backup and recovery procedures, vital for getting back online quickly after a ransomware attack. You need frequent, isolated backups of critical data stored securely, because if your main systems go down, those backups are your lifeline.
Makes sense. What else is foundational?
Then there's automated patch management. This helps streamline security updates across your network, closing vulnerabilities that attackers love to exploit. Think of it like keeping your phone software up to date, but for the whole organization. Other essentials include strong access control. Things like the principle of least privilege users only get access to what they absolutely need for their job, nothing more. That limits damage if an account gets compromised. Robust password policies, obviously, requiring strong, updated passwords. But increasingly, the big emphasis is on multi-factor authentication, MFA.
Right, that second check, like a code from your phone.
Exactly. It's becoming incredibly common, and it's a really effective data protection method for accessing networks, applications. Makes it much harder for attackers to get in. Regular audits of who has access to what, and promptly deleting accounts of former employees that's critical for managing insider risks, too. And encryption, of course, a common way to protect data, especially data just sitting on servers at rest or moving across networks. In transit, we see it widely in platforms like Microsoft 365, Teams. Alongside that, data minimization, only keeping the data you really need, and secure disposal practices, plus having clear processes for sharing data safely.
We talked earlier about human error being such a huge factor,
Yeah.
accidental clicks, phishing victims making up the majority of breaches. So the solution has to involve the people themselves, doesn't it? It can't just be tech and process.
You've absolutely nailed a critical point there. Employee training and awareness programs are vital. They're not just about passing on technical info. They're about fostering a genuine security-minded culture across the whole organization. The goal is to turn every employee into, essentially, part of the defense system. Key areas are things like safeguarding sensitive information, learning how to spot suspicious behavior, especially phishing, given how common it is, and crucially, promptly reporting anything suspicious.
Reporting it quickly seems key.
That proactive reporting, rather than someone trying to fix it quietly or ignoring it, that's a game changer. Early detection can massively limit the damage, and we see organizations recognizing this after a breach. Extra staff training is actually the most common preventative step taken following an incident. 32% of businesses, 38% of charities do this. It shows they understand the need for ongoing education. But engagement is still a challenge, especially for smaller organizations. They often rely on external IT partners, maybe even friends or family for advice, which suggests a lack of awareness or maybe confidence in official guidance.
Yeah, I can see that. Government advice might seem too complex.
Sometimes, yeah. It's perceived as not tailored enough for smaller systems or just too complicated. That can be a real barrier. The key is making training engaging, relevant, so it actually sticks, rather than just being a tick box exercise.
And it's not just about what happens inside an organization's own walls either, is it? Businesses, governments, charities, they're all so interconnected now with digital tools, services. The risk from third parties, supply chains, that must be growing massively.
Oh, hugely. This is a massive area of complexity, and it's getting more critical all the time. You're right. Third-party vendors, digital service providers, DSPs, they can pose significant cybersecurity risks. They might have deep access into your internal systems, they might store loads of your sensitive data, or they could even be the weak link an attacker exploits to get to you, maybe through a phishing attack originating from a compromised supplier.
Like that recent breach involving a supplier to the vet police?
Exactly like that. Shows how even well-defended organizations can be vulnerable through their partners. So mitigation involves doing thorough assessments of your vendor's cybersecurity practices before you sign a contract. Third-party risk management, or TPRM, processes are essential. That means really digging into their security protocols, their data protection measures, their incident response plans for every single vendor you rely on.
But how well is that actually being done?
Well, that's where the challenges come in. The reality is relatively few businesses, only about 14%, and even fewer charities, just 9% formally review the cyber risks coming from their immediate suppliers. Many just seem to assume that bigger suppliers or well-known names must have strong security so they don't need checking. That's a dangerous assumption.
Yeah, complacency.
Definitely. And long-standing contracts often don't get reassessed for security. So you might have arrangements based on outdated security thinking while the threats have evolved massively. It creates these hidden vulnerabilities. Another blind spot is software procurement. Only about a fifth of organizations really consider cybersecurity to a large extent when buying new software. For many, it's just not a major concern, or not considered at all, maybe seen as just an IT issue, not a strategic risk. Which raises big questions about due diligence, doesn't it? Are you really asking the tough questions about how that new tool will handle your data before you integrate it?
Okay, so when an incident does strike, despite best efforts, how prepare our organizations to actually respond effectively? What do those incident response plans, or lack thereof, look like? What are the common pitfalls in those critical first hours?
Well, the initial actions after an incident are usually internal. Most organizations, 76% of businesses, 80% of charities, they report breaches up to senior management. And many keep internal records. That internal communication is crucial for immediate containment.
But what about reporting it outside the organization?
That remains surprisingly uncommon. Only about 39% of businesses and 33% of charities reported their most disruptive breach externally, to law enforcement, regulators, industry bodies. That lack of external reporting has implications. It hinders broader threat intelligence sharing, which helps everyone defend better. And of course, it can breach legal obligations if certain types of breaches aren't reported as required.
And do most have a formal plan for what to do?
That's another concerning finding. Only 23% of businesses and 22% of charities actually have a formal, documented incident response plan.
Only about a fifth. That seems low.
It is low. Larger organizations are much more likely to have one, but for the vast majority, there isn't a structured, predefined response ready to go. What we often hear, especially from smaller organizations, is this kind of mindset. Look, we pay our IT provider, it's their responsibility. They heavily rely on their DSP or external IT support.
Outsourcing the problem, essentially.
Yeah, often delegating all incident responsibility. Now, external expertise is valuable, but doing this without enough internal oversight or process can leave you really vulnerable. What if the provider is compromised? What if the contract doesn't cover this specific scenario? It's like having the fire department's number, but nobody inside knows where the fire extinguishers are or what the evacuation plan is.
Right. And what about that really difficult decision, paying a ransom? Is there a clear policy on that?
It's a really contentious issue. About half of businesses, 52%, and 4 in 10 charities, 38%, say they have a policy not to pay ransomware demands. This lines up with advice from agencies like the NCSC.
But a significant chunk are unsure.
Yes, a significant portion, 20% of businesses, 25% of charities, are uncertain about their policy. This really reflects that ongoing, difficult strategic debate. Do you pay, potentially encouraging more attacks and proving ransomware works, but maybe getting your data back quickly? Or do you refuse, aligning with official advice, but risking permanent data loss, prolonged downtime, maybe even business failure? The cost-benefit analysis for an organization under that kind of pressure is incredibly complex, weighing immediate recovery costs against future insurance premiums, reputational damage, existential threats. It's an agonizing decision. Having a policy decided before an attack hits can make a huge difference in that moment of crisis.
Now, insurance. We think of it as a safety net for risks, but in the cyber world, it seems a bit more complicated. What's the picture with cyber insurance adoption and usage?
It definitely is more nuanced than, say, building insurance. Roughly 45% of businesses and 34% of charities currently have some form of cyber insurance policy.
So less than half for businesses, about a third for charities. Why not more? What are the barriers?
Well, the main reasons cited for not having it are revealing. First, it's often not seen as a budgetary priority. That's 34% of businesses, 41% of charities. Second, a simple lack of awareness. 37% of businesses, 31% of charities just don't really understand what it covers or why they might need it. And perhaps quite telling, for 28% of businesses and 18% of charities, the leadership just isn't interested. Suggests they're maybe not convinced of the value or the severity of the risk.
And for those that do have insurance, are they actually using it when things go wrong?
That's the other side of the coin. Businesses and charities that do have insurance rarely actually make claims, even when they could. It often comes down to an unfavorable cost-benefit analysis. There's a real fear of increased future premiums, which can be substantial after a claim. So they tend to only use the insurance for the most catastrophic events, handling smaller incidents themselves.
So they'd rather absorb the cost than risk higher premiums later.
Often, yes. And larger businesses, in particular, sometimes argue that investing directly in strong cyber controls and recovery capabilities gives them more benefit in the long run than investing heavily in insurance premiums. It really raises that question again. Is cyber insurance mainly seen as just a reactive measure, a backstop for disaster, or is it properly integrated into a proactive cybersecurity strategy? For many, it still feels like it's viewed more as an expense than a core part of resilience.
Okay, so if we pull all these threads together, the rising threats, the human vulnerabilities inside, the tricky third-party risks, the struggles with incident response, the complexities of insurance, what are the big overarching challenges? Why aren't more organizations nailing this when the stakes are clearly so high?
Yeah, it really seems to boil down to a few persistent underlying issues that create this sort of inertia, this resistance to change. Firstly, there's often a real disconnect at the top, at the board or senior leadership level. Boards might place a lot of trust in their IT lead or external provider and then kind of disengage. They don't always grasp the nuances of the cyber actions being taken or the strategic impact of attacks.
Leads to lack of oversight.
Exactly. Lack of strategic oversight, maybe inadequate resources because they don't see it as their problem to fundamentally own and solve. Secondly, there's surprisingly low awareness of official government guidance and initiatives, with things from the NCSC, cyber aware campaigns, cyber essential certification, especially among the smallest businesses. They often prefer to rely on their IT consultants, which is fine, but they might miss out on those broader best practices and threat intelligence.
And the certifications themselves, like Cyber Essentials.
Well, there's often a perception that getting certifications like Cyber Essentials is too difficult or too costly. Even though, ironically, many might already meet most of the standards without having the actual badge, that perception acts as a barrier, stops them using what could be a clear roadmap for basic cyber hygiene. And finally, there's just this general aversion to change when it comes to cybersecurity practices. It often leads to reactive approaches fixing problems only after a breach happens, rather than proactively building resilient systems from the start. It's a profound cultural shift that many organizations are still grappling with, moving from that if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality towards an assume breach mindset where vigilance is just constant.
So given all that complexity, all those challenges, how do organizations actually move forward effectively? It sounds like it's definitely a marathon, not a sprint. Continuous effort needed, not just a one-off fix.
It absolutely is a continuous journey, and one of the most fundamental shifts needed is building a genuine privacy-first culture. This isn't a project you complete and tick off. It has to be a continuous, evolving culture involving everyone, from the intern to the CEO. Key elements are things like regular, mandatory staff training, but training that fosters real awareness and care for sensitive information, not just compliance. Setting clear standards to assess, prepare for, mitigate risks. Regularly reviewing policies and processes to make sure they're still fit for purpose, like how you handle freedom of information requests or manage data access, thinking back to that Oxford Council example.
And being ready for when things do go wrong.
Critically important. Acting quickly when a breach happens is paramount. Having that well-defined data breach response plan is crucial for immediate action. That includes knowing when and how to report to regulators, like the ICO here in the UK, within that 72-hour window if there's a risk to individuals. And ensuring swift, transparent communication with the people affected, that's not just about minimizing harm, it's essential for trying to rebuild trust.
Beyond the internal culture and processes, are there external solutions that can help? Especially for the public sector, overcoming some of those procurement hurdles or finding expertise you mentioned.
Yeah, this is where leveraging external expertise and specialized marketplaces can be incredibly valuable, especially for organizations struggling with internal resources or just finding trusted providers. We know many rely on external IT partners, and there are platforms designed to make that process smoother and more secure. A great example is Ramp Exchange. It's a cybersecurity marketplace specifically designed to help U.S. state and local government agencies tackle their cyber challenges. It centralizes procurement, lets governments collaborate with peers, connect with industry stakeholders, and access trusted, vetted cybersecurity solutions.
So it helps them find reliable help more easily.
Exactly. It offers a really tangible way for these organizations to overcome the difficulty of finding qualified, secure providers. It saves public sector time and money by streamlining how they buy security solutions. It's about making it easier to do the right thing by providing this trusted ecosystem.
Okay, so connecting all these strategies, it really comes back to that ongoing journey idea, doesn't it?
It really does. It reinforces that cybersecurity is this continuous process of learning, adapting, investing. It's about constant vigilance, embedding proactive measures into everything an organization does, and building a robust framework that can actually withstand these constantly evolving threats. It's not just about trying to stop every single attack, because realistically some will probably be through. It's just as much about rapid recovery, continuous improvement, and building genuine resilience into the digital fabric of our public services, our businesses, our charities. The goal isn't perfect security, maybe, but aiming for perfect recovery and constant adaptation.
Well, we hope this deep dive has given you some really valuable insights into this incredibly complex world of cybersecurity. We've covered a lot: the escalating threats globally, the surprising persistence and cost of phishing, those often hidden financial impacts of incidents, and the essential strategies for defense, from basic measures right through to building that culture of vigilance. And while the challenges in cybersecurity are clearly persistent, they're complex, it's also clear that actionable solutions and proactive measures do exist, and they're constantly evolving too. So as you think about everything we've discussed today, what really stands out to you? Maybe it's just the sheer volume of phishing attempts still flooding inboxes. Or perhaps it's those hidden costs of staff time, the hours lost dealing with breaches that don't always show up on a balance sheet. Maybe it's the reality of cyber insurance, why it's not a silver bullet, why claims aren't always made. Or perhaps the profound importance of insider threats, those accidental clicks as much as malicious acts. Consider how these insights might shift your own approach to digital security, whether that's in your personal life, where one click can have consequences, or within your organization, where the stakes are clearly incredibly high. Because really, in this digital age, everyone has a crucial role to play in building a more secure future for all of us. And remember, staying secure often means having the right tools and the right partners. This deep dive was brought to you by Stonefly, your partner for secure ransomware-proof storage solutions. They offer air-gapped and immutable storage to protect your critical data, making sure it stays safe even from sophisticated attacks. To learn more, maybe schedule a demo, just reach out to sales@stonefly.com. They're really dedicated to keeping your digital world safe. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We look forward to having you with us for our next exploration into what truly matters.